So before we get to the 90s, I would be remiss if I didn't do the top 10 original 80s horror movies. So basically this list is going to be either part 1s, they could be from a franchise as long as it's a part 1, and basically not a remake. So like John Carpenter's The Thing can't make it on here because it's blatantly a remake of The Thing from Another World. The way I decided I'm going to tackle this list is basically if somebody said I want to get into 80s horror and I was going to give them a list of 10 great horror movies that are originals or part 1s for them to dive into, I would make them start from 1 to 10, but I'm going to give you my list from 10 to 1. I'm really excited to see what you guys get for this because the last two have been super fun. You guys have had some great picks in your list. So without further ado, here are my top 10 original 80s or part 1 horror movies. Coming in at number 10, guys, is going to be John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness. This may not be on a lot of people's list, but for me, this is clearly one of my favorite 80s outputs that John ever did. I was raised Roman Catholic, and religion was just like a scary thing growing up. And the thing I love about Prince of Darkness is it takes the element of religion, God, and the devil and turns it into pure horror. There's no denying I love Alice Cooper in this movie, and man oh man is the score so great. Prince of Darkness may not have the most singable score that John's ever done, but in terms of effectiveness, man, it works. You've got Donald Pleasance back again playing a great preacher. The cast is impeccable. The special effects are creepy, especially with the guy turning into like the bugs and beetles. And man, oh man, that Prince of Darkness song from Alice Cooper is just awesome. Fun fact, the first time I watched this movie, when I saw the image of that camcorder footage coming in for the first time, where you look into that church and you see the silhouette of like what looked like the Grim Reaper, I thought my TV screwed up and something crazy was happening. It was an amazing time in my life watching that for the first time. I love Prince of Darkness. It's got to make my top 10. Coming in at number 9, guys, is Joe Dante's The Howling. Oh, man. When I was making this list, The Howling kept coming into my head, and I was like, Christian, don't you dare not put that on your top 10 original 80s horror list. I don't like to say one's better than the other, but for me, all day, I gotta say my personal favorite is The Howling. And it's the one I would show a horror fan if they were getting into 80s horror. It's scary, it's creepy, I love Dee Wallace in this film, and while the transformation scene isn't as vivid as American Werewolves, the darkness in that building that the two are in and that werewolf comes out is just scary as hell. I love The Howling. Coming in at number 8, my boy Charlie makes it yet again. I've got to give it up to Re-Animator. Yeah, having Re-Animator in this list is something I just knew I needed to have done. I absolutely love Jeffrey Combs as Herbert West in this film. When you look at the horror comedy genre, you got to look at certain films, and Re-Animator has to be in the conversation. I think it's Stuart Gordon's best film. It could possibly be Empire's best film. It could possibly be Charlie Band's best produced film he's ever done. This movie is just standing the test of time, and more fans come to it every single day. When you look at the 1980s, you have to look at Re-Animator as just one of the best. Coming in at number 7 is my favorite director's film. You can't have an original 80s horror list without having the great Creepshow. I think that when you look at the horror anthology genre, pound for pound, I think you could say that the first Creepshow might be the best ever. You get everything you need. Great characters. All the segments are 10 out of 10s. I love the cockroach one at the end too. Great humor, great music. It's the total package. I adore Creepshow, and besides maybe Night of the Living Dead or Day of the Dead, Creepshow is at least top 3 of the all-time favorites from George. This movie is perfect, and then even the wraparound stuff with Tom Atkins is a home run. Creepshow is one of the greatest that the decade had to offer. Coming in at number 6 is Tom Holland directed Child's Play. You know, I just finished listening to an interview with Tom, and he was talking about Child's Play, and I wonder if people underestimate how much influence he had over the first movie. Having Brad Dourif in the film was all Tom's idea. Having the serial killer invade the doll was all Tom's idea. Tom Holland is Child's Play as much as Don Mancini is to me. And that first movie is about as good as it can get. I'm done going back and forth. I think the best Child's Play is in fact the first one. While the ending of part 2 overshadows the ending of part 1, when you look at the ending of part 1, it's damn good. That burnt Chucky hovering over Andy at the end is some of the scariest stuff ever. I love the suspense of the first movie, and I love the Chicago atmosphere. Child's Play is one of the best of the 80s, and in terms of the latter half of the 80s, it's possibly the best. Coming in at number 5 is The Shining. I think this is one of the greatest horror movies ever, but when I was making this top 10 80s original horror movie lists, when deciding what encapsulated the genre the best, especially if I was going to show this to somebody that was like, hey, go watch these 10 movies, I felt comfortable putting it right here. There's not much I need to say about The Shining that quite honestly hasn't already been said. I think it is just a perfect movie. It's A24 before A24. I think it's Stanley Kubrick's best film. But there's some stiff competition up there. But pound for pound, I'd say The Shining was the best. And Jack Nicholson just kills it. Everything about this movie is just... Shelley Duvall, everything about this movie is just so good. And I notice something new every time I watch it. The Shining is just one of the creepiest, most unsettling horror movies ever. And it was a hell of a way to start the 1980s. Coming in at number 4, guys, is Sean Cunningham's Friday the 13th. I had to put Friday the 13th at this point in the genre, in the list, because I think that this movie really does just set the stage for what the decade was about to be. You know, the thing I love about the first Friday too is just, man, it's so spooky and atmospheric, and I don't like the term slow burn. I think movies are either interesting or not interesting, and for sure, I think the first one is just edge of your seat in terms of the mood it sets. It took me a while to come around to really understanding and loving the first Friday the 13th, but when I rank the series now, the first one is my second favorite, behind the final chapter. Sean S. Cunningham is a hell of a director, and he's still not getting the credit he deserves. When you look at some of the stuff he's done, like Friday, Deep Star 6, New Kids, he's a hell of a director, and a great producer at that. But the first Friday the 13th is just the tone setter for the decade. I love it to death. Tom Savini comes into his own here, and of course Pamela Voorhees is an icon. The first Friday the 13th is just still so good. Coming in at number 3, guys, is A Nightmare on Elm Street. Yeah, even though this isn't my favorite A Nightmare on Elm Street, to deny the legacy and success that Wes Craven did with this film would just be silly. This movie really doesn't have anything wrong with it. The cast is great. Freddy Krueger, performed by Robert Englund right here, just, this is a great Freddy. There's no denying it. The sense of humor is there, but he is menacing and dark, and I love that about him. And the score from Charles Bernstein possibly is the best thing about this movie. Charles Bernstein's score for Nightmare on Elm Street is about as iconic as you can possibly get. It's pretty much up there, if you ask me, with John Carpenter's Halloween score. I mean, the first Nightmare on Elm Street is about the most 80s thing that you can possibly get. I love it. Coming in at number 2, Tom Holland makes it here again. I think one of the absolute best original 80s horror films of the decade is Fright Night. This is a love letter to the horror fan. Once you become really big into horror, watching Fright Night is just like watching an old pal or talking to an old pal. It's the horror fan's horror movie. Everything about it is so great. You're through the eyes of a character who loves horror. You've got Peter Vincent, the vampire killer. I mean, the idea of a kid who idolizes these horror movie show hosts, getting help from them to stop a vampire, is about the most, I don't know, horror fan thing you could possibly think of. Jerry Dandridge is such a good, seductive vampire, and an interesting thing I learned was that he likes to eat fruit in the movie because, for him, his character had fruit bat DNA in him, so that's why he's eating apples a lot, and now that's just way cooler to me because I love fruit bats. That's my favorite kind of bat. Fright Night even has a great soundtrack. Go to YouTube, type in Fright Night soundtrack, and click the video that has the picture of the CD, and just listen to all the songs on it. I'm not saying it's the Lost Boys, but song for song, it's pretty damn close. And the number 1 original 80s horror film to me is Return of the Living Dead. Now, I know this is somewhat of this offshoot thing, but when you talk about original 80s horror, I don't know of anything more original than Return of the Living Dead. Again, if you're familiar with my channel, this is zero surprise to you, as you know it's my all-time favorite movie. The incredible cast with James Karen, Clu Gulager, rest in peace, to the amazing punk rock score, the punk splatter effects in this movie, the quick pace, the great music, everything here just works on a 10 out of 10 level. I think this is one of the greatest, if not the greatest, horror comedy movies ever made, and it's just simply one of the best 80s horror movies period. I love it. So I asked my patrons what they think are some of the best 80s horror films ever. Saturn Video said Child's Play. Ebert Thawne said A Nightmare on Elm Street. My buddy Steak Sauce says Night of the Creeps. That's a great one. And Mark Allen also said A Nightmare on Elm Street. So there you have it. I think there's no denying Elm Street's going to be on a lot of people's lists. But I ask you, what is the best 80s original horror film? Let me know down in the comments section below. Thank you guys for watching. Now let's get to the 90s. Thank you to all of my Patreon supporters who make videos like this possible. To get behind the scenes photos, videos, music, private live streams, and more, you can subscribe to my Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Thank you very much.